Hello, and welcome to the Narrowing Path, Walking the Spiritual Walk. My name is Steve Van Eiderstein, and thank y'all for joining me today for the daily reading from James Allen's Daily Meditation. And this will be for June 23rd, and I'm very much looking forward to it. And the reading yesterday about how we have to practice these principles, practice these laws, and practice these things before we really get a concrete knowing of the spiritual laws was very important for me. So I think it's great. Um, I'm looking forward to till days, of course. I do want to say thank you for all of the support today, because as of in this immediate moment, we've had over 1,000 streams of the podcast. Um, and given that there's so many episodes, I think this is going to be episode 175. It's not necessarily that much, but um, I'm very excited about it. I'm very grateful for it, and thank you for everyone who jumps on and supports and binge listens and or follows every day. I am truly grateful for that. So thank you so much. So yeah, over 1,000 streams, and I hope it keeps on going, and I'm going to keep on going at least. So that's the cool part. So this will go on with today's. This will be fresh to you and fresh to me, meaning you'll get my genuine response, reactions, observations, and what I relate to about the reading, because this will be my first time hearing it or reading it right on the podcast with you. So here we go. This is June 23rd's reading from James Allen's Daily Meditations. Truth can only be arrived at by daily and hourly doing the lessons of virtue. In a properly governed household, the child is first taught to be obedient and to conduct itself properly under all circumstances. The child is not even told why it must do this, but it is commanded to do it, and only after it has so far succeeded in doing what is right and proper is it told why it should do it. No father would attempt to teach his child the principles of ethics before exacting from it the practice of filial duty and social virtue. Virtue can only be known by doing, and the knowledge of truth can only be arrived at by perfecting one's self in the practice of virtue. And to be complete in the practice and acquisition of virtue is to be complete in the knowledge of truth. Be undaunted by failure and made stronger by difficulties. I love this. It's another one about practice. It's another one about why we have to begin by doing, right? He equates it to a child, equates it to a child. How the first lesson in discipline, the first rules and regulations a child gets put under is what not to do. It's strictly regulated by external action, right? Not the spiritual social principles that underlie the actions. It's a practice of doing first. And as they mature and as they practice these things, these virtues he's saying they are here, further on the understanding is disclosed to them as to why. And that's the same way with spirituality. We have to behave differently first. We have to. Because that's the only way the change gets started. So The daily practice or hourly doing of virtue, of practicing of virtue, is always one I love to read about. And then the ending line was fantastic as well. Just um, that's a quote that's quotable right there. Be undaunted by failure and made stronger by difficulties. Right. That's life right there. That's life. We no longer need to give up. We no longer need to um, roll over and stop trying. Let us be undaunted by failure and made stronger by difficulties. Difficulties and failure are there to mold and shape our character, not to punish us. Very big different, very different type of perspective to take too. So let's go through this line by line. We've done a bit of it already, but that's okay. So, truth can only be arrived at by daily and hourly doing the lessons of virtue. I like this because this isn't a one-time shot. This isn't like, oh, I was honest once today. This is a all the time. This is a daily, hourly, minute, moment to moment practice. This is a way of living that spans all of your living. Virtue is meant to be practiced in all areas of your life. There's a couple principles, practices of the 12-step community that's coming to mind. The 10th step in the 12-step communities is continue to take personal inventory, right? So we're continuing to monitor our own behaviors and our own actions. And then the 12th step, it says practice these principles in all our affairs, right? So we bring virtues into all areas of our lives. We bring spiritual principles, guides, and disciplines into all areas of our lives. So it's goes right hand in hand with all spiritual programs, spiritual living. So, all right, the main body of this. In a properly governed household, the child is first taught to be obedient, to listen, to follow instruction, and to conduct itself properly under all circumstances. So it's taught how to behave, right? And for someone trying to change a habit, you have to stop the old habit first. And you're usually given actions to take instead. In the 12-step community for alcoholism and drug addiction, you show up to meetings, you call people in the fellowship, you pray, you meditate, you reach out to that higher power of yours. There's things you can do instead of doing that, right? So it's the physical action that needs to be changed first. And it needs to be changed to an appropriate action. That's what he's saying here. So even as grown adults when grown adults are changing habits and behaviors, it goes the same way. Like this little child, we have to be obedient to the new action first, regardless of how we feel about it, regardless of if one moment we feel like we want to do it anyway, if we just self-pity and justify our way out of it, right? Like we will, our minds are very incredibly powerful things. We'll talk ourselves out of it, right? So we need to be obedient to virtues we are practicing, to the actions that go along with it. So, yes, taught to be obedient and to conduct itself properly under all circumstances. The child is not even told why it must do this, but is commanded to. And not only after it has so far succeeded in doing what is right and proper, it is told why it should do it. So the actions change first. And with practice and repeated action of the right course of action to take, the right behavior to have, only then is the actual virtue or principle behind the change in action discovered. Is it only then is it found out? Only then is it known. Because then there's the experience that goes along with it. If we were given that before the change in behavior, it wouldn't work. We wouldn't believe it. If we didn't agree with it, or we didn't have an experience with it, so we tried to say it wasn't something we needed, right? Well, turns out if you do the action first, the spiritual principle is much more likely to be accepted and understood and valued for what quality it brings into your life. But it's after the change in behavior, like with drug addicts and alcoholics. You have to stop drinking and you have to stop drugging before you can actually get to the root of the problem. And then after you stop doing it for a while, you get to the point where you understand that those were not the issue, or at least not the primary issue. You start to see that you yourself is the issue. And those are your solution to yourself. But again, the action had to be practiced first. So he finishes up this paragraph with no father would attempt to teach his child the principles of ethics before exacting from it the practice of filial duty and social virtue. One second, I'm going to look that word up. Filial. Of or due from a son or daughter. So their due duty, their expected behavior, their expected duty and social virtue. Okay, that makes sense. So no father would attempt to teach his child the principles of ethics before extracting from it the practice of due duty and social virtue. Okay, that makes sense. Again, so the behaviors have to change first and they have to be established and the new habits have to be rooted and then the understanding comes afterwards. When they're saying the Father here too, they're talking about that power greater than yourself, God of your understanding, source, nature. It will just be disclosed to you why that needed to change, either through the mouth of another person or just an understanding you were given. It can come in many different forms. All right. Goes on again here to say virtue can only be known by doing, and the knowledge of virtue, the knowledge of truth can only be arrived at by perfecting oneself in the practice of virtue. And to be complete in the practice and acquisition of virtue is to be complete in the knowledge of truth. So virtue is meant to be practiced, which is the choice to follow spiritual principle, which is the choice to live correctly, righteously, Christ-like, to live a life of truth and honesty, to follow the spiritual way of living, to walk the narrowing path, as we call it. And when you do that, when you achieve virtue through doing, you're working towards having a perfect understanding of the truth, the knowledge of of truth, of righteousness, of goodness. He calls it goodness a lot too, right? Knowledge of truth can only be arrived at by perfecting oneself in the practice of virtue, right? So the truths of living, the truth of being of service to God and others, the truth of um, absolute unselfishness, the truth of being connected to that power greater than yourself, the truth of the who you actually are. And that can only be really uncovered and discovered by the practice of virtue, by the choice to live well and to live rightly for the right reasons. But the reasoning can't change, right? So we're covering all three bases here, right? The reasoning, the intention in our soul cannot change until we have practiced virtue, until we are living a virtuous way of life, until we're choosing to live spiritually, right? So I've referenced this a lot in the at like one of the last lines in As a Man Thinketh is him saying that self-control is strength, right thought is mastery, calmness is power. So that's the backwards work we do here. You stop the behavior, you change the thinking, your soul's intention changes, and you're doing it for the right reasons. You're living a righteous life. So calmness sets in. And that's this process we just talked about in today's reading. We are doing, we change the behavior, we change the action. And through doing that, we understand the virtue of choosing to do the right thing. Whether it's being honest instead of lying, loving instead of hating, forgiving instead of holding the grudge. We practice virtue. And through that, we find truth. Excuse me. Through that, we find the ability to change our souls, to be loving and faithful. And through a complete practice in the acquisition of virtue, it is to be complete in the knowledge of truth. So the more areas of life you practice virtues, the more understanding of the truth you will have. Makes you want to go, at least it makes me want to go and just do the work. Makes me want to go and just start finding out where I can improve and I can get better. It's a pretty amazing thing. And then the last line we talked about a little bit already, but just to repeat it, be undaunted by failure and made stronger by difficulties. You will not do this perfectly. You'll make foolish decisions still. You'll think you're doing the right thing and it will turn out to be the wrong thing in just a different package. Right? It happens. Don't don't give up. Work through it. It will mold and shape your character, and it will bring you the place of virtuous living and understanding and knowing of truth. Every failure and difficulty is a stepping stone in the path of spiritual living, as long as you're taking spiritual actions. So, all right, just bombshell of a reading today. Absolutely loved it. I hope everyone else did too. Um, Thank y'all for joining me today and sticking with me for the over 1,000 streams. I really appreciate that. I'm excited to see where this goes. So thank you for everyone jumping on and being a part of this with me. And we'll be back tomorrow. Until next time. Thanks.